Very good afternoon, and thanks for clicking on to the Tuesday edition of Vogan's European Outlook for the 3rd of September. Before we continue with the video, if you're enjoying the content here in the channel, if you're relatively new as well, hit that like button, drop a comment, and if you haven't already done so, please hit that subscribe button as well. It would be greatly appreciated. The tropics remain relatively quiet. There is 3 areas of interest that the National Hurricane Centre is keeping an eye on, and we do have the potential down the road. It sounds as if I've been saying that now for weeks on end, but down the road we have the potential of development, especially into the Caribbean and potentially the Gulf of Mexico. But there is still a lot of hostility. The atmosphere remains more reflective of El Nino as opposed to La Nina. Certainly based on the tropical Atlantic anyway, there's been a lot more shear than typically expected within the Atlantic basin as La Nina is developing. But there is reason to believe that there is changes going to be taking place. But there is a lot of competing factors this year that I think has been really overlooked in a lot of different ways. And I suppose a lot of forecasters did not expect to see the ITCZ spread as far north over Africa as we're seeing. And we'll look at Africa in just a second here. I know it is a European outlook, but I want to look at a couple of very interesting factors. But anyway, let's look at the interest areas. There's one over the Caribbean at the moment with a 0% chance of development. This is over a 40-hour period, by the way. So we've got this system that is moving to the west, but it has got shear to contend with, and don't expect anything to develop with that immediately. There's a 10% chance over the next 48 hours of development with this feature over the central MDR, and then we've got another feature with a 10% chance closer to the African continent developing over the next 48 hours. Looking at the 7-day, and this is how it looks with regards to potential development. So I've got this feature here that is in the edging towards the Central Caribbean. It's the NHA is up the chance to a 40% over the next 7 days of development. They go on to say a tropical wave is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms over Hispaniola and portions of the Central Caribbean. This system is expected to move west, and a tropical depression could form when it reaches the Western Caribbean Sea. We should start to see shear relaxing, and like I said, the atmosphere looks more reflective of El Nino as opposed to La Nina. La Nina tends to reduce wind shear over the tropical Atlantic, but with the SOI now moving well into positive territory, we should start to see the shear relax a little bit over the tropics, and therefore a greater chance of seeing some of these waves. They have to also break away from the convergence zone of the ITCZ, or intertropical convergence zone. They need to try and break away from that and become their own entity. Having a hard time doing that as well. There's been dry, dusty air also in the mix, and like I said, the intertropical convergence zone has been spitting these African waves further north out over colder waters than further south where the water temperatures are conducive. So 40% chance as it moves towards the Yucatan Peninsula over the next 7 days. Looking at the system over the central MDR, 10% over the next 7 days. So that's got a reduced chance of development. And then we've got a 40% chance, like the one in the Caribbean, over the next 7 days developing here. They go on to say that a tropical wave over the far eastern Atlantic is producing disorganized showers and thunderstorms, blah, blah, blah. Environmental conditions are forecast to become a little more conducive for development, and a tropical depression could form later this week while the disturbance moves slowly west-northwest over the northwest direction over the eastern tropical Atlantic. Now, the big question is this: with regards to our weather pattern, do we see either of these features moving northwards? Now, I know the Caribbean one is unlikely to do that. It's going to head more towards the west and into Mexico, possibly even turning up towards the southern United States. We'll keep an eye on that. The features in the central Atlantic, the one in the central and the one in the eastern Atlantic here, you know, if these systems can then start to turn northwards, that can have disruptive influence. It can help produce more of a meridional or amplified jet stream, for example, and it also could enhance ridging, but also troughiness over the mid-latitudes extending from North Atlantic into Europe as well. So these are very much important players, even though there might be thousands of miles to the south of our part of the world. So this is why we keep a close eye on the tropics going forward here, and that's been something I've been alluding to for quite some time. Like I say, the SOI, the Southern Oscillation Index, is expected to continue going from negative, which is more atmosphere reflecting a El Nino type base state, to more of a La Nina type base state. Once you get these numbers well into negative territory, we then start to see the atmosphere respond to the cooling that we're seeing over the equatorial Pacific. Now, what is quite interesting here, there's a few factors to take into consideration. Now, we may start to see the MJO moving through the Pacific Ocean towards the Americas as we progress through the month of September. But there is reasons to believe that the jet stream is kind of weakened, and it also is expected to become a little bit more amplified. Now, by that I mean we are seeing ridging out. Remember what I said to you, this has been for quite some time now, and this is based around my September forecast, that we see ridging build to the north of the British Isles and to the north of Europe, low pressure kind of trapped underneath. Now, if we look at the latest GFS 500 millibar pattern, you can see that we've got a feature that's dropping in over the British Isles here through the course of today and tomorrow. That becomes quite a thundery, showery regime for the majority of the UK and Ireland here, trapped beneath a pocket of fairly chilly air in the mid and upper levels of the atmosphere, incoming solar radiation that then forces the air to rise, and we see the showers developing, thunderstorms potentially as well, longer spells of rain. But notice here that as we play through the loop, notice here that there's a little bit of a stretched out trough here, dropping all the way down into Iberia and northwestern portions of the Mediterranean. Now, we'll look at that in just a second, because we're seeing some very lively thunderstorms developing over Majorca and the Balearics this afternoon. We'll look at that on satellite in just a second. But watch this space here. Watch as we play through the loop. This is off the GFS ensemble. There's that strong high building. Notice here that the low is dropping to the south here. So this is all part of the idea that I've had, that the low becomes trapped underneath this kind of omega block situation here developing over the northern UK. We've also got some warm, humid air moving in on that easterly flow underneath the ridge core itself. Low pressure to the south, high pressure to the north. We've got an easterly flow. Certainly in the winter time, this would be an impressive winter pattern, potentially, if you've got enough cold air over Eastern Europe, for example. But this area of low pressure kind of winds up, deepens over Biscay, if you notice here, and has the threat of throwing showers and thunderstorms up into the southern half of the British Isles here. So this is, as we move towards the end of the week, drier and more settled, better conditions to the north, always more unsettled and cooler conditions across more southern areas of the UK, and then obviously quite an unsettled theme underneath that upper low over Biscay, dominating the majority of Iberia and France with this situation. And then as we continue to play through, this is where things get a little bit more interesting towards the middle portion of the month. As we progress through the course of the weekend, still high pressure in the north, low pressure trapped underneath. It becomes divorced from the main flow, it cuts off, and then it kind of spins around, and sometimes it can wobble around, it can bounce around. It doesn't really have any flow to then steer it, so it kind of bobbles around, like I said, underneath the area of high pressure. But notice something here as we move towards the early portions of next week. This is Monday the 9th of September. We then start to see a trough dropping out of the north over the British Isles and the UK here. And if we look at the Northern Hemisphere view, you can see what is evolving here. So if we look at the big picture, this is how it's looking, more of a positive, extended from the central North Atlantic up through Greenland, up into the Arctic region. If you look at the Arctic Oscillation, it's expected to go negative, which is quite interesting, actually. Remember, for the majority of this summer, it's been positive, but it looks as if it's trending negative. And if you look at the North Atlantic Oscillation, it too, mainly positive over the summer, trending negative as we move towards the middle portions of the month here. Now, if we look at the temperature anomaly here, you can see a cooling trend towards the middle of the month. Now, this is could be the first actual cool spell, if not cold spell, given the time of the year, this would potentially be a cold spell for mid-September standards. But if we look at the temperature anomalies here, let's just look at the 5-day anomalies here. So upcoming 5 days, warmer than average, cooler than average down across western France and much of Iberia, if you notice here. As we play through this loop, you can see here the cooling trend. Warming up may increase the warmth as we progress through the second half of this week, by the way, given the high over low situation. But then watch what happens according to the GFS ensemble. We start to see a significant cool anomaly developing towards the middle portions of this month here. Looking at the CFSV2 to see if that is seeing the same thing. Week 1 looks like this here, and then week 2 is looking like this. So it is worth keeping an eye on this, and also the tropics have to get taken into consideration. The Julian oscillation as well is another interesting one. Let's have a look at the MJO and see what it is suggesting. Whereabouts is it going? It's going in from phases 5 into phases 6, possibly into 7. So this again would be conducive to the potential for blockiness developing over the North Atlantic, Greenland and Arctic as we move towards the middle portions of this month. So we will keep an eye on that going forward. Do we have a potential cold spell mid-September? That is something that I'm now starting to look at in a little bit more detail. So we looked at the tropics. We've looked at the potential pattern moving towards the middle portions of the month. The rest of this week looks unsettled, but it becomes an increasingly improved one, especially the further north you go over the UK as well as Ireland, and pleasantly warm conditions as well. That is another thing to take into consideration. Let me see here now. Let's look at the visible satellite. This is actually the water vapor loop, and this is quite interesting. So if we notice here, we've got an area of low pressure just to the northwest of the UK and Ireland. We've got this deepening trough here, driving some fresher, cooler air south of the UK around the backside of this low. But then ahead of it, we've got warm, humid air getting lifted north. And look at this here. Can I blow this up? You can see here the blow up of convection here. Is it going to allow me to do it? That's about the best I think I can get. But you notice here as we progress through the course of today, we've got this blow up of convection here, these lively thunderstorms, northeastern Iberia, over the central area of Iberia. At the base of the trough, if you notice here, this is where warm and cooler air is meeting, continental versus Atlantic. And then you get this big blow up of thunderstorms from Iberia towards the Balearic Islands here. But also notice the development of thunderstorms blowing up over parts of northern Algeria, really extending from the spine of the Atlas Mountains here. Look at this here, the convection erupting over the high ground of the Atlas into parts of northern Algeria, over Tunisia as well. You can see here the thunderstorms blowing up, which is quite interesting. Also just off Sicily and the southern portions of Italy as well. Now let's have a look at the thunderstorm activity here, and it is a pretty lively map to say the least. See here plenty of thunderstorms over the Eastern Caribbean associated with that feature that the NHC is looking at. We've got a continuation of thunderstorms over northwestern Gulf of Mexico into Texas here, where we've seen that disturbance linger right the way through the Labor Day weekend here. We've got some thunderstorm activity both to the west, but more so to the east of Florida here. Stalled out frontal system associated with that. But check this out. How often do we see this amount of lightning coverage over northern Africa, over the Sahara Desert? But also if you look into the clusters of thunderstorms, look at this here over northeastern Algeria and into parts of northern Tunisia, down towards northwestern Libya, for example, eastern. This is quite astonishing for this time of the year to see this. This is usually a bone dry location for the majority of the year, never mind the heart of the summer, late summer into the early portions of the autumn. But then look at, like I've said, some very lively thunderstorms blowing up over Mallorca, and Ibiza here. So Sardinia also seeing some lively thunderstorms. So a very, very active day when it comes to the Balearics, parts of Iberia, but also across many other areas of Europe here. down over the mountains of the Balkans, Italy, in the central areas of Europe here. Not so much over the UK, as you can see here. Parts of Denmark and even northern Germany seeing some lightning activity also. Let's have a look and see what the current temperatures are looking like as of just after 4 p.m. So we've got a fresh afternoon once again across the northern UK. We've got some warmth clinging on to the far south, low 20s, possibly even mid 20s in fact, in a couple of spots. It looks like Essex, for example, seeing 25 at Southend-on-Sea, and over towards the capital here, 23.3 at St James's Park in London. And then elsewhere, it's mainly teens at the moment here. Looking at the temperatures over Europe, and you can see here that we've got the collision between fresher air coming in from the northwest, colliding with some fairly hot air over North Africa and over parts of Eastern Europe. The heat just been consistent, persistent all summer long. I'm sure folks here are just dying to see something a little bit fresher coming in, I would imagine here. Looking at the other factors here, let's have a look and see what the latest radar is looking like over the UK and Ireland here. So we've got plenty of showers, some down towards the East Midlands here, Lincolnshire, possibly extending. We've got some lively thunderstorms along the border between Norfolk and Suffolk here, Cambridgeshire, for example, and then shower activity running through over the northern UK, over parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland as well. We've got some showers to speak about. So I also wanted to show you this here. This is of the ECMWF, and it's showing North Africa. This is quite a significant and exceptionally rare event where the intertropical convergence zone has been further north than usual. But watch this here. So we've obviously got the thunderstorms blowing up over the mountains and elsewhere across North Africa at the moment. But if we play through this loop here, normally, you would see this convective line extending from Ethiopian highlands all the way across to off the west coast of Africa, coming out, the convection usually coming out over between Senegal and the Cape Verde. Now watch what happens as we move through the course of this week. Notice here that we're starting to see convection spreading north and heavy rainfall starting to break out further north. Even the fact that the modelling is showing this is quite incredible. But look at how spread out, instead of it being a kind of confined zone of convection west to east, we're seeing it spreading out away from the equator, away from the normal position of the ITCZ, but even further north over quite a widespread area of North Africa. This is moving towards Friday. Friday in particular is quite incredible to see this amount of showers breaking out the further north you go into the deep Sahara. Typically sunshine, 45, 46, 48 Celsius would be normal. You do not typically see this taking place in this part of the world at this time of the year, and really even most of the year you don't typically see this. So this is a very, very unusual event taking place. Let's real quick look at Europe overview chart here over the next few days here, and we'll close with this. Remember that I will be talking about winter later on this week as well, so stay tuned for that. If you're a lover of all things winter like myself and many of you, please hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss any upload. There is going to be plenty of winter chat to speak about. So there's that flabby area of low pressure, cooler in the mid and upper levels, warming at the surface, generating the showers and thunderstorms here. And that is a common daily occurrence through the course of this week here. Then you start to see the low getting pushed to the south as heights rise across the northern UK. There's that easterly flow, but it is a fairly warm and moist flow. So we've got increased humidity getting pulled in from the near continent. And you can see here the rash of showers and thunderstorms. If you look at the 850s, it shows you that it is a relatively warm air mass. We've actually got temperatures at 850 of plus 15 Celsius. So it's going to be a muggy easterly flow, to say the least here. Going back to the overview chart, we'll play through this loop here. You can see the convection showers running the easterly flow, but it's generally to the Midlands southwards, high and dry across more northern areas. Then you see some of the showers spreading a little bit further north here, seen by the model here. But generally speaking, high pressure looks as if is going to rule the roost here. Let's actually quickly look at the African view once again and just see total accumulated precipitation here, because this would be quite interesting to see what it's showing. So we'll play through this loop, and you can see here that rainfall moving further and further north into the Sahara Desert as we progress through late week and into this weekend here. That is an astonishing map. And this is another downside to the tropics, getting going, is the fact that the ITCZ is spread out that area of convergence, lower in pressure. And I think this has got a lot to do with the Mediterranean and North Atlantic sea surface temperatures. The area of high pressure displaced further north and essentially pulling the ITCZ and moisture from the typical source region up into the typically arid sub-Sahara and Saharan Africa. So there is a lot of things to look at here and look back on. Also check out the September forecast, because the September forecast has a lot more. Look back at the summer just gone, scoring the forecast. I did give myself a 7.5 out of 10 for the success rate and the verification of the forecast. Let me know if you agree with that. So plenty of reason to stick around. I think I've spoken long enough, and I will, all being well, see you tomorrow with more. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Bye for now.